Welcome to the Gentleman's Guide to Gaming and part 3 of our Dark Ages Vampire Chronicle recap. The coterie had just reached the Frankish town, Norman town in fact, of Rouen. Rouen is a town in which many of the Franks speak many different languages. It's an important transit point for traders, as the Seine cuts through or very near to it, and therefore there is actually a route from Rouen to Paris for riverboatmen. That, and it also, of course, exits out into the English Channel, which means that there's plenty of traders who can get as far as Rouen without needing to go any further, and is a popular drop-off point for goods. Therefore, the mercantile enterprise in that town is fairly hefty. This results in more Cainites within the town than would be typical for a town of its fixed population. They primarily feed from travellers and those who make transit via the town. As we had left off, our coterie were just purchasing new clothes from the market in Rouen. Specifically, Cheyenne was interested in getting out of her waterlogged, rotting rags and into something a bit better. It's worth noting Cheyenne, whose face was horribly burnt in the first chronicle by her encounter with a mage of House Flambeau, has been wearing a delightful white mask that's been completely concealing her face from that point onwards. So really she has to make do with the rest of her apparel. The rest of her body is magnificent. It is worth noting this because as a Toreador she is, of course, very interested in appearances, and she knows that the rest of her clanmates think likewise. Her garb, therefore, is best suited as finery, and she wasn't afraid to spend pretty much the coterie's money in order to get her decent clothes, whilst Ulrich and Coraline were still clad in beggar's clothes. It was only after she had spent the coin in order to purchase these articles, and I did actually look the currency up. I think it was livre. I may be completely incorrect, but what's interesting is that that currency was actually still being used in France for about 600 years later. But either way, they purchased the articles, and as soon as having done so, Cheyenne received a telepathic communication. Someone was watching them, someone who could see very well, with Auspex, the vampiric discipline of heightened senses and the like. It summoned the coterie to an inn by the name of the Black Bear. And when they arrived, and it was by crossing an open sewer, it wasn't a particularly nice part of town, they arrived, they walked in through the door, and doing so, torches ignited, as if to make for some grand flashy display, as if to say welcome but also be afeared, because as they walked through the door these torches went poof and lit up, and Coraline nearly fled. She started panicking because La Sombra, fear of the light, and so on. And bear in mind, again, it's always worth stressing, Dark Ages and the Middle Ages is an era lit literally by firelight. So that is the only light that vampires see. It's a light that they cannot grow close to, but is the only method of seeing well in darkness. Of course, many vampires can get cut through the dark with their own unnatural senses, but it's an odd dichotomy. They need to grow close to it, and of course they need to stay a distance from it. The La Sombra and Setites, to an extent, are very much harmed by fire and light, and so Caroline's panic set the inhabitants of the Black Bear into fits of laughter. It was like a languid sultanate, a kind of harem. Lots of pillows, straw pillows and straw beds, and vampires just sort of lounging about, just sitting there, generally giddy with excitement to see some new vampires on their territory. As these three walked in, they just burst into fits of laughter, and our three British vampires felt quite embarrassed to be there in that situation, especially those two who still look like beggars and the one who was having to be restrained. After the mirth had died down, the coterie within, the Frankish coterie, or Norman coterie I should say, there is a difference, introduced themselves. Now, I have looked, but I have lost my list of names of Cainites of Rouen, which is irritating. I can't think where it's gone, because it may have been deleted accidentally, and I do handwrite these things as well, but can't find that either. But I do recall a particularly wiry, red-haired vampire by the name of Cyril, who never blinks. I recall a young girl, probably around the age of 12, by the name of Clementine, or Clementine, and for whatever reason I can't remember the essentially lady of Rouen's name. I apologise for that. I'm sure my players will be able to correct me as they take fastidious notes as to what the name was. But they introduced themselves and then inquired as to the coterie's identities and their purpose for being in Rouen. Now, for whatever reason, the players hadn't decided on their alternate identities before heading off. They knew that they couldn't actually introduce themselves as agents of Prince Mithras aiming to set up war between the Courts of Love and the Fiefdoms of the Black Cross, because that's the kind of information that would end up getting you killed. But they didn't think of what their names would be, who they said they were working for, what their purpose would be in the Courts of Love. They had completely neglected to make any kind of cult plan. I was aware of this and just didn't encourage them, because I wanted a situation like this to occur. So they have received introductions and they were asked for their own. This required some quick thinking and some decent subterfuge rolls. Coraline introduced herself as Emily, the name of one of her herd, or her retainer, back in the British Isles. That was an easy one. Ulrich really struggled to think of another name and was just sort of going Sven and settled for Isven. So he was kind of named after his own ghoul, who had, by the way, been admonished for his behaviour in the previous session, and was pretty much commanded to never to commit an act like that again without my say-so. Now, you may say that's out of character for a vampire to be so involved in the sins of mortal flesh, but if you consider it like this, Ulrich is on the road of kings. It's a road partly of chivalry, part of codes of law and the like, and Sven doing these acts without a command from his master was therefore betraying some of what Ulrich holds dear. And so Sven agreed, rather sullenly, and the rest of the blooded men were all shacked up in a brothel whilst all of this was going on. We have established that Sven and Ulrich possibly have a typically their sexual relationship is between each other. As a general rule, Ulrich, as well as feeding from his herd, possibly has sex with them as well. So there's a bit of a Spartan thing going on there. But this is yet to be fully explored, and I would be interested to see if it is in future sessions. Cheyenne. Cheyenne, now, did Cheyenne come up with an alternate identity? While they were scrabbling around to come up with different names and their reason for actually being in town, Ulrich unfortunately blew their cover entirely. This was much to the shame of the player involved. One of the Norman Cainites just happened to ask, "Who is your sire?" to Ulrich, because he said he was Isven of Clan Ventru, and Clan Ventru are well known for being able to recite their lineage. And he cited his own sire, Ulrich's sire, the Lord of Copenhagen, perhaps, off the top of my head, Prince of Copenhagen. Now, that would have been fine if the Prince of Copenhagen had more than one child. Unfortunately, Ulrich is his only child, and therefore the Happy Huntsmen, and that's their name, the coterie who exist within Rouen, were suddenly brandishing weapons and threats and saying, "Okay, well, now you're going to tell me who exactly you really are. what you're really doing here, and Clementine can tell truth from lies very astutely, so do not think to deceive us again. It took a little bit of conferring, but the coterie in the end decided that their best recourse would have actually been to tell the truth. They based this on various factors. For instance, there were bull horns of Mithras above the door. They hoped, therefore, that the Happy Huntsmen were actually a part of the Mithraic cult. They also considered that Rouen is technically within the Kingdom of England and Wales, is as far as mortal geography goes, because it's part of the Norman fiefdoms, and Britain, or England, is still Norman at this point, or it's the Angevins who are in power. They base this on a lot of contingencies, a lot of what-ifs, a lot of hopes and optimistic dreams, and were very fortunate indeed that the Happy Huntsmen of Rouen are in no way interested in politics. So when they were told that they intend to set off a war between the Courts of Love and the Fiefdoms of the Black Cross on behalf of the Baronies of Avalon, they applauded. They were quite pleased, they were quite entertained, and they were just grateful that they told them the truth. And they explained, what we do here, we don't involve ourselves in the Courts of Love, we don't involve ourselves in their pageantry, their chivalry, their travels to courts, their pilgrimages, and their queens of love and kings of love. We just hunt. We live for the hunt. For every fortnight, we roll dice. And each of us must roll a die, and each result corresponds to a different target. And this applies to any who travel within our borders. You must roll a die, and you must slay the target within the night. And if you do not slay the target within the night, you are not permitted to stay within the boundaries of Rouen. You must stay outside in the wilderness where the lupines dwell. And therefore, greater numbers carry greater risks. Which one of you wishes to pursue a hunt, or do you wish to move straight on tonight? The coterie were considering. They weren't sure. Did they move on? Did they move straight on, carrying on to Charter, knowing that they may be caught out in the sun? They had no real currency left after Cheyenne had blown it all on clothing. And no method of quick travel, no horses with which to get to Charter. Fair enough, they could steal them, but could they command them? None of them were Gangrel, Ravnos, they had no affinity with animals. In the end, Cheyenne put her hand up, she volunteered. She would involve herself in a happy hunt, and she would be competing against one of the natives of Rouen, a Gangrel. Occasionally the natives would be ostracised from the town themselves. It was a way of essentially keeping only the strongest Cainites within the borders, and all they really exist for is this hunting game that they indulge in. Now, the target was completely randomly rolled. It was actually rolled by luck of the die. Cheyenne's player rolled and came up with a mage, a magician, a wizard. And were there any within the town? By good grace and luck, there were. Within sight of the church, on its upturned boat hull, there was a unnaturally verdant square within town. The mortals just seem to pass it by and not pay it any heed, despite its unnatural presence. There should not be such greenery, such opulence of nature within this, well, minorly urban environment. That is the kind of thing for forests, for glades, for fields. And yet the vampires knew that it was because a mage made his domain within. He has a little chantry within the church, within its grounds. And within that chantry, he and his fellows practice their magics and keep themselves to themselves, but their main focus is on nature. Now, Cheyenne, having been wronged by a mage before, her face being horribly burnt by one, was actually eager to participate on this little junket, as was the Gangrel. And the first among them to win, the first among them to score a kill, and this would be witnessed by other Cainites who would be following the hunters, the ones they favoured, would be allowed to respite during the week to come, would be allowed freedom to feed within the citizens of Rouen, and various other cursory benefits. So, Cheyenne headed out, accompanied by Ulrich. Caroline stayed with Clementine, the little girl who could apparently tell all truth from lies, because she wanted to get to know her a little better, and Clementine wanted to get to know Caroline a little better as well. They exchanged quite a lot of information, and Caroline found out some of what was going on in Chartres to the south. A Queen of Love, Azuda de Blaise, was the, you could argue, Prince, Lady, Queen of not only Chartres but the surrounding region. And that great pageantry was upheld in this area, that great proclamations of love and declarations of loyalty would win you more friends in this part of France than in many other. They had completely fallen for this road of chivalry, this path of chivalry, this air of romance that was beginning to filter its way through the courts of love. This became very useful information to come. And they formed a little bit of a bond, even if Clementine was asking many probing questions. Clementine, by the way, a Malkavian. Now, meanwhile, out in Magetown, they knew that the Gangrel was taking a circuitous route. He was prowling around. He was intending on setting traps. That is apparently his way. He would harry his victims into areas he would intend to kill them. He would very rarely attack up front, which was unusual for most of the Gangrel the coterie had encountered before. And so he was busy setting up one of these traps, acting like a fat spider. Cheyenne took a more direct route and saw this verdant greenery outside of this church. Every bit of it was making her feel uncomfortable. Her skin was starting to itch and be sore. It was a mixture of faith and a mixture of magic, true magic. Ulrich advised perhaps setting light to some of his plants might call him out and distract him sufficiently that you could create a quick execution. Cheyenne liked this idea, Ulrich playing the worm-tongue-like advisor to the hilt, as usual. And so, Cheyenne actually paid off a little boy to set the fire, a runner, set the fire, and then flee. The boy went to set the fire, and as he did so, found himself constricted and coiled and digested swiftly by the rather unnaturally growing plants within the glade. Now, that's not to say that the fire did not start. It did. A mage emerged, completely nude, his body like bark, in that it glistened and gleamed, young, healthy bark. Bronzed almost, this pinnacle of humanity, except of course, being a mage, he is more than that. And oddly, the mortals around this part, the dung herders and, dung shovelers and beggars and the like, paid absolutely no attention to what was going on. It was only because the vampires were supernatural of a type that they could see any of this, that this boy who had been commanded to drop a torch into the rods where these vines were growing was grabbed, pulled, and almost immediately turned into compost. He just disappeared into the garden as the mage appeared, and then proceeded to bring about a rain that would put out the flame. Cheyenne took that opportunity, and being armed with 3 points of celerity, darted at speed across this piazza, knife in hand, and with her 3 points of celerity, I might add, grabbed the mage's head and went and just cut clean through to the spine, wrenched his head off, and then began to drink the blood from it. This was a victory for Cheyenne. This was her on the road of sin. This was her getting reprisal for the damage done to her beautiful face. This was her proving that she was a more than adequate hunter and more than just a foppish toreador that so many expect to see from that clan. Ulrich was actually flabbergasted and disgusted by this display and made way to escape quickly, because there were mortal guards and indeed priests around this kind of locale that would probably react badly to a vampire drinking the blood from anyone, let alone a mage. The mage's blood was double in potency to what a mortal's might be, and so Cheyenne was flush with power and ran on a rampage through the town. When everyone had recovered their wits and returned to the Happy Huntsman's tavern, she was applauded. The gangrel was cast from the town, and he did so nobly and respectfully, and he said he would prey on the lupines instead to refine his skills. And all in all, the coterie won themselves respect and contacts in the Happy Huntsmen of Rouen. They were all delighted by the display that was put on for them. And so, by way of a boon, what they earned through their hunting, they asked for a wagon, or cart rather, and horses, so they could travel to Charter at speed. And after resting during the day, they set out during the following night, and soon arrived in Charter, where the game took on a very different bent. Thank you very much for watching.